Have you ever wondered, quote, why, despite great obstacles, some people achieve success while others, though given everything, seem to squander it away, unquote? Or why, as our guest book jacket frames the question further, quote, despite having very little, radiate joy, while others surrounded by opulence appear miserable, unquote? Using the Vedic wisdom teachings, which describe the ancient system of social structure and spiritual duty as Dharma. That is the focus of our discussion with Simon Chokoisky. Simon's book, The Five Dharma Types, Vedic Wisdom for Discovering Your Purpose and Destiny, an Inner Traditions 2014 release, is a terrific compendium, as you will learn from our discussion. Find out how the differences between us archetypally as educators, laborers, merchants, warriors, and outsiders help us find and know our purpose and discover new meaning in our lives. Join us for a wonderful exploration of ancient Vedic wisdom regarding our individual and collective ways of being in the world. Simon Chokoisky teaches Sanskrit and medical astrology at the Ayurvedic Institute in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and runs a private consulting business. He is also the creator of the Decoding Your Life Map with Vedic Astrology DVD series and travels the world teaching. It is a pleasure for us to welcome to 21st Century for the full 2 hours, Simon Chokoisky. Thank you for joining us, Simon.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, and for pitch hitting for one of our guests who's up in the mountainous terrains with no cell signal.
Well, I love that you're using the baseball term because, we'll talk about that later, but I'm applying astrology to mundane events like sports and baseball in particular, so I like that you're using that metaphor.
Oh, what fun. We'll get to talk about that. You know, years ago when my husband was doing numerology through looking at the lottery, I started predicting winners for sports on TV based on T-shirt numbers and the coordinates of their hometowns. And, I knew nothing about the team, so we'll have a lively discussion of how people with different talents, be it astrology or numerology, can actually see tendencies towards the future. But firstly, I want to thank you. The book is extraordinary. It's such a gift to everybody. And I thought it important, while we have the time, we don't always, to find out a little about yourself, Simon, and how you got on the path of studying the Vedic teachings.
Well, absolutely. And, they say you write what you know, and my sort of life has been a quest for purpose. And in those 20 or so years of questing to find my own purpose, I interviewed many people. I read many different philosophies. I was actually a French major in college, but that didn't take me very far. So I turned to Eastern wisdom, and I found some answers there, and ultimately ended up stumbling on these ancient archetypes that are like an operating system for the soul, and found my own purpose, which is to share this ancient wisdom. That's the Dharma of the educator, is to communicate knowledge and truth to the world. And in that process, over the course of 8 years of researching and seeing if this stuff actually worked, because I'm a very sort of Western, sort of practical in that sense type of person. If something doesn't work, no matter how nice the idea is, then, you have to throw it out. But this stuff does work, and I found it to work in not just my own life, but in people I loved, and then ultimately working with clients and groups and students. And so I thought, now it's time to write a book about this, and that's The Five Dharma Types is the result of that quest.
It's just, the interesting thing, I think, for people when they first hear about the Vedas and Vedic wisdom, they go, oh, come on, these things don't apply to us now. This is, maybe it fit in the agrarian culture or in the hierarchical way in which the society was organized. But the interesting thing, as you point out, is these 5 Dharma types really do fit us in the modern world. So why don't we start with what Dharma is?
Yeah, you bet. So in the West, I think we understand, or we have a good idea of what the word karma means. And the sense that karma is as you sow, so you reap. The word dharma was always understood in Sanskrit and in the Vedic tradition to go along with this word karma, because by doing your dharma, you, in essence, minimize karma. Dharma erases karma. That's what I like to say.
And for those that aren't familiar, other than hearing it used in very popular slang, what karma is traditionally from a traditional vantage point.
Karma is the seeds you were born with. So, a pine tree comes from a pine cone or a seed, pine seed. A different flower comes from a different seed, and we have our DNA. And in a sense, karma is the spiritual terminology for what you can expect in this life, what you've reaped if you believe in past lives, which you don't have to, actually. So either what you've reaped from past lives, or if you don't take that line of thinking, what you've inherited genetically from your ancestors, both your parents and then their parents and so forth, and what in the effects of that and what you will sow in your own lifetime. So that's called karma, the effects of the seeds that are in you. And now I know this isn't a popular sort of kind of definition, because we think, oh, if I step on an ant, then a bird is going to poop on me, and that's karma, right? Well, it's not always that direct.
In terms of measuring or observing cause and effect, even though all traditions tell us to look for the root of the cause, but sometimes it's not knowable.
And exactly, and because of that, this word dharma comes into play. And dharma means living in accordance with your design, living in accordance with natural law. So, for example, at some point, early, humans probably jumped off a cliff to see, hey, let's see what this is like.
Let's see if we bounce.
And the law of gravity took its effect. You went splat. And then when enough people did that and enough people observed it, they said, hey, let's observe this law of nature and respect it and not jump off the cliff. And so, of course, I'm making it a little simple, but the idea of Dharma is to live according to the natural law of your own being. And it states that everyone has a design, a software that you were born with. And when you really understand that software and you work with it, you minimize negative karma and you optimize sort of desirable life experiences.
Right. And hopefully, elevate your own opportunities so that you have more choices and make better decisions. The thing I like about the Vedas and the use of astrology, as you also practice from a Vedic vantage point, is that it really gives you tools to observe the world around you and to observe your inner impulses, so that you can become better self-managed. I mean, and as an astrologer right now with, Mars square Pluto going on for years ahead of us, that the whole world is being challenged very vigorously with radical change. So these things happen in individual lives too. Now, when you say that if we follow our dharma, we end up having less karma. It almost sounds like a song we're going to have. But there's another component called dukkha, right, which is suffering. Yeah. And how does that fit into this sort of trinity of dharma, karma, and then dukkha? Did I pronounce that properly?
Dukkha, yeah.
Okay.
That's the word that the Buddha used when he said the world is suffering. He said, dukkham asti. There is such a thing as suffering. Suffering exists. And dukkham or dukkha is, again, another fancy, we're diving right in, aren't we? This is great. We're going for it.
For sure. Thank you.
And dukkha means suffering, and it's suffering in the sense that, if you get a cut or you break your leg, that hurts. But it's also the sense that there is impermanence in the world. There's constant change. You were young once, and now you're not young. You were, I used to have a six-pack, now I don't have a six-pack. All of these things based on physical, mundane reality are limited. They come and go. And so the Buddha said, if your happiness is based on these things, then you are going to experience dukkha, suffering, because you will lose those things in life. And he said, however, there is an antidote to that. And the antidote is to realize that which is beyond change, beyond suffering, that which is eternal, that is ever present. And that's, in essence, pure consciousness. That's the part of you that survives death. And, of course, we're talking now in metaphysical language, but even if you want to speak in a very scientific language, you could say that dukkha is banging your head against the wall or jumping off a cliff. You know, you're not following the laws of nature that say eventually that wall is harder than your skull and you're going to suffer pain because of it. Dharma says find the door.
Right.
You know, and learn how to open it and walk through the door and live your life in a way that minimizes that kind of suffering. And that's the Dharmic life.
And the beautiful thing about these teachings that I have always felt so honorable for the world is that it makes so clear that when any one of us becomes self-mastered and stops this personal suffering, we improve the world for everyone. There used to be, people would say that it's so selfish to meditate and so selfish to cultivate your inner life. But the truth is, it's if we had a civilization that helped our children when we're young how to cultivate this inner nature, the decisions we make would be so much more in harmony with natural law.
Yeah, one of the aspects of Dharma is that it's not a limited resource, meaning that, and happiness is not a limited resource. If I'm happy, that doesn't take anything away from you. If I'm fulfilled, it doesn't make you less fulfilled. And I think that's the difference. People make sometimes they equate physical resources like, money, water, food, property. If I take property, then by extension, I'm taking someone else's land, and they have less. But Dharma doesn't work that way. And so if you sit and cultivate your own fulfillment, the opposite happens. You actually kindle. You begin to shine like a torch. Mm-hmm. And this is the benefit of hanging around enlightened beings, people who embody that. Even people like Tony Robbins who have this kind of energy, and you hang around him and you start getting excited about your life rather, I have had mentors from India who are saints. They just radiate a light, and you just sit with them, and that light sort of catches it catches fire.
It lights your soul. As we say, the teacher's light really lights us up, and more so oftentimes after they're no longer incarnate than while they're incarnate. It's a different kind of lineage emanation. And it's interesting because I know that Dr. Vasant Lad, who founded the Ayurvedic Institute in Albuquerque where you teach, just has such an exquisite reputation worldwide for having brought probably more Westerners to the Vedic tradition than maybe any other teacher.
Well, I'll tell you a little story. You asked me about how I got into this. I got into this thanks to Dr. Deepak Chopra after reading a couple of his books in the early 90s.
Yeah, he's wonderful. He's been our guest over the years.
And I really major hats off to him for introducing so many of us to these traditions. Mm-hmm. But I went to the center to learn one of the meditations, and my meditation teacher there said, and he was a Jamaican guy, and I'm going to, ruin his accent, but he said, "Man, if you want to go learn the real thing, you got to go see Dr. Lad. Him at the Ayurvedic Institute." I know I'm ruining it.
No, it was very good, actually. Not knowing the original, it sounded fine to me.
Well, if there are any Jamaicans, I apologize in advance for, ruining the tongue. But anyway, so he said, go meet Dr. Lad. He had this intuition, and he was right, because that institute in Albuquerque, New Mexico is like a center. It's like the center of a web and of Vedic learning, and it connects people who are into healing, people who are into meditation, people who are into astrology, into Vastu, which is sacred architecture, and so many other disciplines. And it's kind of like the old universities in Athens, where you go and just hanging around the people there and the teachers, you become lit up. Mm-hmm. And so that's the idea of doing your Dharma. You become a light for others. And Dr. Vasant Lad is certainly a light. Yeah,
extraordinarily. And you can learn more, by the way. We're going to take our first break at www.ayurveda.com. Ayurveda.com. That's Ayurveda, if you don't know how to spell Ayurveda.com. And that's the institute in Albuquerque. As it happens, my stepdaughter, Zohara Hieronimus, is a student of Dr. Lad, and her boyfriend, I think you know, Jeremy Findell.
Oh, yeah.
See how little the world is? I mentioned to her, I said, so funny, I'm having this gentleman on, and from the institute you studied in, and do you happen to know? And Jeremy goes, oh, yeah, I know Simon. We'll be right back. Our guest is Simon Chokoisky, The 5 Dharma Types, Vedic Wisdom for Discovering Your Purpose and Destiny. Destiny Books 2014 release, and learn more at his website, www.spirittype.com.
Hello, this is Joseph Emmett, author of Buddha's Book of Meditation and of the upcoming Finding the Blue Sky, a book about mindfulness and happiness. You're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronimus.
Simon Chokoisky is our guest. His book, An Inner Traditions, or Destiny Book, 2014 release, The 5 Dharma Types, Vedic Wisdom for Discovering Your Purpose and Destiny. So, Simon, now let's try to move towards, and it takes a lot of time, and I'm so glad we have, it was like divine providence that we have the whole program to do this. When you talk about archetypes, one often thinks about mythologies, and myths really do help our society connect to these basic archetypes which reflect these various natures. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, and myths make money, too. If you look at the biggest blockbusters at the movies, you'll see, Star Wars and Spider-Man and all of these movies based on mythical themes, the hero myth, the wisdom holder, Merlin, and Arthur, the divine warrior, and these are archetypal myths, and the reason they make money is because when we see something true in them and it pulls us, like something inside us that's beyond our superficial everyday reason says, no, there's something important here, you have to see it. And so what we think of myth as something that's not real, right? Oh, that's a myth that, women don't like guys who are unkempt. That's a myth. Some women like that. But the word myth doesn't mean something unreal. It means something that perhaps you can't be proven, but something that goes deep into archetype. And the word archetype is a Greek word. And again, not to get too geeky here, but arche means ancient. Type means model or mold. And so an archetype is like the ancient mold into which creation fashioned humankind. Like if you ever had those toys, like a Star Wars toy, and they come in a mold, in a cast, and you pour plastic in it, you close the mold, you let it cool, and you have your toy. And we're like that in the sense that we all embody certain archetypes. And if you don't believe me, just think about these two basic archetypes of man and woman and how much they define us. And there are only two. So out of 7 billion people on the planet, more or less half are one archetype, half are the other. But imagine waking up one day not knowing which one you were. Just these very basic biological types. Granted, they are biological types, but they're also archetypes. Which bathroom would you use? How would you cut your hair? How would you dress? How would you behave with your loved ones? Knowing that simple thing, gender, or that archetype, male, female, defines so much of what we do. And in fact, for a lot of people, this is a real issue, for people who are non-gender specific. So, but most of us take it for granted, right? It operates in the background. Oh, I'm a guy, you're a girl. Okay, we take that for granted. The Dharma types say, well, look, the basic knowledge that you have about you being a man or a woman in this life is the same as you knowing whether you're an educator, laborer, merchant, or warrior or outsider. If you don't know that, it's kind of like not knowing whether you're male or female. It's that important.
What you belong to.
Yeah, it's your tribe. It's your it's your community. It's who, it's your basic, are you a Mac person or a Windows person, right?
Mac all the way. And it's interesting because I've never even used anything other than a Mac. Isn't that funny now that I think about it?
That's your tribe.
Yeah, baby. In the beginning of your book, I love that you have these introduction and a self-test, and you offer all these different things of, circle the word that means the most to you or describes you best. And then you have freedom, loyalty, wisdom, honor, prosperity. Then you have circle the phrase that means the most to you or describes you best, independence and bliss, love and devotion, worldliness and knowledge, etc., etc. So the questions you ask help us kind of presumably narrow down to one of these: an outsider, a laborer, an educator, a warrior, and a merchant. But what happens if you take the test and let's say you end up with some outsider and some laborer or some educator and warrior, but no merchant? I mean,
right.
Can't people be more than one archetype and a different archetype at different stages of life?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, that test, it's a simple 10-question test. When you answer each of the questions, you have to circle each answer that applies to you. So if A, C, and E are all true, you circle all three of them.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And because if you just give one answer, it's not complete. It was designed to be done that way.
See,
and
there I am. I started your book and didn't read the instructions. My apologies. I did take the test without the instructions.
Well, you know what? I read books from the last page backwards. I'm the same way.
That's a very Torah thing to do. The end is wedged in the beginning.
Yes.
All right. So coming back, though, to these archetypes, why don't we take a little time and maybe you can sort of give us the basics of, why don't we start with, well, where would you like to start? With the educator?
Yeah, we could certainly start with it doesn't matter. The thing about these archetypes is there's no one type that is better than another. They're like the fingers in your hand. Which one are you going to chop off first? You're going to lose either way. There's no one type that is better than another, nor is the archetype hereditary. So you didn't necessarily inherit it from your mom and dad. And that's where this system differs from a lot of the caste systems and the sort of social structures set up in, everything from ancient Polynesian society to, of course, India, where we know it's a big deal. So we could start anywhere. So we could start with the educator. The educator's dharma, purpose in life, is to share wisdom, knowledge, and truth in the world. And each Dharma type has an element associated with them. And for the educator, it's the air element. And in traditional cultures, the air element is associated with communication. When you speak, your speech travels through the air. There's a sense that communication is an air element thing. The air element also, it manifests in a number of ways. One of them is educators like to live high up. So the ivory tower, you know that expression?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like President Obama was an educator type, and he had this sort of aloof air about him. And this is one of the perhaps shortcomings of the educator, is that they're a little too above it all, a little too, they're perceived to be, whether they are or not is a whole other thing, but they're perceived to be a little hoity-toity, kind of too smart for,
or in their head too much. They're just in their head,
exactly.
Put it that way. In their
Right. And so that's why educators do well to integrate into another type. So if you are an educator, you integrate into the warrior, which is the fire element, and air and fire get along well together. So to become more dynamic, more involved with a real world and so on, and not just to be in your head. So the educator's dharma, their purpose in life, is to learn when they're young and to teach when they're middle-aged and older. That's essentially it. It's that simple. Now, it doesn't mean you have to become a teacher. You can be a scientist. You can be a park wilderness guide. You can be a cab driver, but the way you drive the cab is going to be fundamentally different from how someone else drives it. For example, the ride gets in, says, take me to 56 and whatever. And along the way, here you are pointing out monuments. Did you know that in 1936 that bridge was built and the architect's name was so-and-so? Like, you can't help but share information. You can be, working at the grocery store and someone is buying the papaya and you'll tell them, do you know that the ones from Mexico are actually better than the ones from the Philippines?
Mm-hmm.
Funny thing, and people are like, just ring me up, okay?
Right. So when you say educator, automatically somebody thinks of a professional teacher, a professor, a teacher at school, whatever, or a sports coach. And what you're saying is the archetype of educator is somebody who has a desire to share information, to elevate others, to communicate.
It's in you and you can't help it. It's what you do anyway. The flip side of that is people see it. So you could be at a bus stop at 2 in the morning and someone will come up to you and just start telling you their problems if you're an educator. And
mm-hmm.
because there is an aura, there's kind of a sense of non-judgmental aura about educators, that people feel they can trust them, that they can open up to them and share their secrets.
It's so interesting, and I think maybe because it's not an easy topic, ladies and gentlemen, to digest in a 2-hour radio program. But maybe, Simon, the way it would be productive is if we stay with each Dharma type and look at it from the different angles you did, so that as we move through each one, we will have covered it thoroughly. And the reason I think that is I'm just so struck by so many ways in which you went about helping a reader appreciate that having a Dharma type is not just saying, oh, I'm an educator, but learning that there's certain types of stress that affect us based in whether we're the merchant, the laborer, the warrior, the outsider, etc. And you said that with an educator, it's ruled by thinking, and the type of stress is long-term mental stress. And then you write, its nature is chronic. And you can see spaciness, dementia, exhaustion, or as I sometimes say, I just have left brain fatigue.
Yeah. Yeah, educators need more rest than any other type, more physical rest, just downtime to allow the nervous system to release all of the information. So not that the other types don't need, but we educators are a little bit wimpier than everyone else. And so,
well, there's also, as you point out, the seasons and the elements like Vata, which is this airy element. If you're an educator and your constitution is also very airy, it's like, wow, how do you stay anchored? And so all of these, as you describe in your book, show up in the seasons, in our senses, in even our gross anatomy.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. There are certain body parts that, for example, as the educators it has an affinity with the nervous system and the brain, warrior with the heart and the circulatory system, and laborer with the bones and the reproductive system, and so on. And we can talk about those. But one thing. Can I just
Please,
digress?
Go wherever.
A little bit.
Please.
I just had a conversation today with a doctor who is studying the microbiome. If you don't know what the microbiome is, it's the totality of bacteria living on your inner and outer skin. Okay, and which they're finding, meaning modern researchers and scientists and doctors, are finding it to play a far more important role in our health than we ever thought before. We thought it was just diarrhea and stomach upset, but it turns out that these bacteria make 80% of the serotonin, 80 to 90% actually. They're responsible for most of our immune system, and they often dictate whether or not we get dementia or not, whether or not we fall prey to Alzheimer's or not. We think that these are just localized illnesses, but a lot of them depend on our gut flora. And so here's where I'm going with this. In this conversation I had today, we were talking about the idea of fortifying your own good bugs and, killing off the bad bugs that are invading our systems and affecting our moods, making us be not ourselves. So my whole work my books are all about how to be your best self, right? How to live your dharma, live your purpose. And a big part of living your purpose is sort of protecting your inner borders. And when I thought that, I thought, my gosh, you know what? The world today, not just in America, but the world is so concerned about its borders, right? We have invaders coming in over our walls, taking over. And of course, this is why Mr. Trump was elected in large part, right? Because he promised he would put a stop to that. And this is why, other leaders get elected because this sense of national security. And my thought was this. You asked me earlier, how does this stuff apply when there's so much going on in the world? Well, I would propose this to you. If we can handle our own borders, meaning the gut line, the gut-associated lymphatic, there's something called GALT, the skin in your GI tract that is literally the wall between the outside world, which is the food and the bacteria you put in your mouth, and your inner self. And in most Americans, that lining is either irritated, inflamed, or compromised. And so we are literally feeling invaded by foreign invaders that are taking us over, that are creating inflammation and heart disease and overwhelming us. And so our psychology is going, well, let's build a wall. Let's support our borders. But
right, we externalize what's an internal state we're not aware of, we're not conscious about.
And the whole focus of this work and the work of the metaphysical work is make your own self healthy first. Take care of your borders. Do an enema once in a while. Take some probiotics. Eat fermented food.
Yeah.
Get your inner wall healthy, and then you can tackle the outer stuff. And so the essence of what I do is to help people find their self, to sit within their own walls and feel comfortable and feel like, yes, this is who I am.
And this is, we've talked about this on my program over the decades about this issue of boundaries, boundaries between our inner life and our outer behavior, boundaries that we put up to unhealthy action towards us. And, and women in particular have a lot of trouble with this because women are often raised to believe that to use your strength is to be aggressive rather than to use your strength, as I like to say, like the sword of Joshua, the left hand of Gevurah and discrimination, is to protect what's holy. And men have no trouble doing this, standing up for themselves, making a lot of noise, saying, don't you do this? And for women, particularly I would guess worldwide, it's been so many millenniums, so many generations now of women not being allowed to have their local personal voice heard. And so it's interesting how the Dalai Lama says, it's the Western woman who will help liberate the world. And I'm just so glad you're talking about the internal milieu, because as we always in all esoteric traditions teach, as above, so below, and as within, so without. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. If you're just joining us, Simon Chokoisky, spelled Chokoisky. His book, The 5 Dharma Types, Vedic Wisdom for Discovering Your Purpose and Destiny, a Destiny Books 2014 release. Go to www.spirittype.com.
Hello, this is Leonard Perlmutter, author of The Heart and Science of Yoga, the American Meditation Institute's empowering self-care program for a happy, healthy, joyful life. You can learn more about us at americanmeditation.org. You are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronimus.
Welcome back, and thank you, Brother Leonard. We had a wonderful talk about the vagus nerve, and if we can just relax that solar plexus, that knot in between the bottom of your diaphragm, and breathe through your belly, it takes away a lot of the stress a lot of people experience. If you're just joining us, Simon Chokoisky is our guest. His book, The 5 Dharma Types, Vedic Wisdom for Discovering Your Purpose and Destiny, a Destiny 2014 release, a Destiny book. Go to www.spirittype.com. So how about if we come back to another archetype? We've talked a little bit about the air element and the educator. And the next is, how about the earth laborer? Because I love that you picked out Columbo as an example of what a laborer looks like.
Yeah, he's one of the archetypes that those of a certain generation will remember, because laborers think with their gut brain. And again, coming back to this idea of the gut, while the educators are the brainiacs, the laborer types are the very intuitive, heart-centered, gut-centered, kinesthetic sense, meaning they have to see and feel and touch something to understand it, type. So the laborer's strength, earlier before we went to a commercial, you talked about how women expressing their strength, and I would add to that strength comes out in different ways. So if a woman is an educator, her strength will be her wisdom and her reasoning, her rationale, and speaking truth to power. If she's a laborer, her strength is a different type of strength. It is a strength rooted in the earth element, which is understanding family and community and what's right on a very deep kind of foundational level. Laborers are the foundation of society. Without them, we don't have cities. We don't have. We're all nomads without the laborer's homemaking instinct. And so this salt of the earth type is embodied by people like Bruce Springsteen, by Columbo, by Mother Teresa, people who naturally have a devotion and a love of their community and want to serve, and not out of a sense of inferiority, but out of a sense of you have to be strong to serve, to really serve. And they have that. Laborers are very strong type from the get-go, whereas the educator needs years of school to learn how to share their wisdom. The laborer comes to this planet ready to go. And because of that, they're sort of the rock of Gibraltar. They're the foundation of any good society. And laborers ultimately win you over with their perseverance and with their love and devotion. So if you're a laborer parent, and your child is acting up, you don't necessarily punish them. You say, listen, I don't approve of what you do, but I still love you, and I will always love you. And that sense of, even without the words, of holding that space, you win people over.
You pointed out, and by the way, folks, this book is so wonderful. There are charts throughout it. So you read some paragraphs and then you look at a chart, and the chart really summarizes all the pages beforehand. So it makes it very easy to come back and refresh, the quality of what these Dharma types are like. Again, back to the stressors, because, you don't often see people talk about this relative to the archetypes. They don't say, oh, well, if you're a warrior, you're going to have stress of thinking too much, or you're going to have, acute post-traumatic stress. People don't talk about these things. But in fact, post-traumatic stress, when we think about what's going on worldwide to our first responders, to our military, to people who have trauma, this is a real situation. But I want to come back, though, because we're on the labor. And you said that one of the issues for the labor is long-term emotional stress, because the labor is ruled by their feelings. And an example would be worry or low-level anxiety.
Yeah, they worry about everyone they love. And that's what makes them, the classic Italian mother. Hey, why you coming home so late? I worry about you.
Yeah.
And it's a real thing. Laborers also neglect their bodies. So we're talking about chronic, long-term physical breakdown, too, which is joint, hip replacement, stuff like that, because they neglect their needs to serve others. Whether it's you're serving your spouse or your kids or your boss, doesn't matter. Whereas educators we talked about earlier, it's long-term nervous system stress. They'll sit up till 4 a.m. reading the latest research on XYZ because they need to know. That's their passion. But that takes a toll on their nervous system.
So going back to where we started, which was the educator, and you talked about the quality of air. With the laborer, you assign it historically. I mean, we're talking about Vedic wisdom teachings, not your own, but you've elaborated on it, is the earth element. So when we think about somebody who is a laborer, we're not just talking about building brick walls, we're talking about building societies.
Yeah, foundationally. And that laborers are solid. They tend to be more solid and earthy and speak more directly and appreciate directness. It doesn't mean they're more or less intelligent than anyone else. Laborers are more specific. So a laborer may be a brain surgeon. That's a very specific area of expertise, whereas an educator might just be a general practitioner and they know a little bit about everything in medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So laborers tend to have very specific knowledge. In the earth element means their bodies also, I mean, there is a physical component to this where, and again, they need more minerals than other types. They need to supplement their earth element, but their bodies tend to be more well-knit. And they do tend to have a little bit more of a tendency towards plumpness when out of control.
Mm-hmm. And we won't be able to do them all, folks, so I hope you stay with us next hour to hear more about these different archetypes, but we can touch again on another one, which is the warrior. And you attribute the warrior, which one would think is natural, the fire element.
Yeah, and so the fire element is a transformation. It transforms one thing into another. You light a book on fire, and that it turns into ash. And it's the warrior's duty, their dharma in life, to solve problems, to transform suffering into healing. So a lot of warriors become doctors, for example, or they go to work as firefighters or in law enforcement, because it's their job to solve problems where they exist. And if they can't find a problem, warriors become a little antsy. And here's the quick acid test to know if you're a warrior type, okay? So you're in a group of, with 20 people in a room, all of a sudden a loud noise, a bang outside. Everyone puts their head down, but the warrior is the first to go, all right, what happened and how can we fix this? They take the lead. And so warriors tend to thrive in emergency situations because they actually feel calm.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel calm when the what is hitting the fan around you, then more than likely you're a warrior Dharma type. And when they can't find that emergency, sometimes warriors will create it, like James Dean driving too fast. He was a warrior type. You start taking risks with your life so that you can create an emergency situation. And that's a disintegration of the warrior. And I talk about in the book how to live in the normal world as a warrior type.
Because warriors are also innovators. I mean, sometimes in order to lead the way or to, show another approach to solving a problem, you have to, I don't know, do you have to also be an outsider? I mean, there's so many combinations that fascinated me because when I read each one, I went, whoa, I see that in me. Oh, yeah, I'm the educator. Oh, yeah, I'm the laborer. Oh, no, I'm a warrior. I'm not a merchant. The only thing I'm not really is a merchant.
So you're likely an outsider type.
I am totally an outsider type.
Because outsiders are the innovators. And when you read the test and you go, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's the outsider, because outsiders can blend and take on the appearance of any of the other types in a given situation. So outsiders have been blessed with the freedom to play any role. But back to the warriors, there can be innovation if you are in an outsider period in your life, and that's another level of this. But fundamentally, the warrior's dharma is to fight for a just cause and to give their life as necessary. Mm-hmm. And that just cause can be putting dinner on the table for your kids. It can be that simple. It doesn't have to be a big, high and mighty kind of thing.
And I think, that's one of the things that's so wonderful about this book, The 5 Dharma Types, is that it allows each of us, whoever we are, in whatever capacity we have in the world, to appreciate that it adds to the whole. I mean, I think that's one of the things I love so much about the Vedic wisdom teachings in general, is that it says that we're all of merit, and that it's important that there be all of these different qualities in the world, just as there are the seasons or the elements. Yeah,
do your part and leave the rest to God. That's the essence of this tradition and of the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the sacred texts in the Vedic tradition, where God is speaking, and God says, Sodharme nidanam shreyaha paradharmo bhayavaha, means it is better to be bad at your own dharma than to be good at someone else's, because to be good at someone else's invites constant fear and anxiety.
When we come back, I'll tell you what, Simon, we have to break for the hour. We'll be right back. It's a beautiful thing you've said. Simon Chokoisky is our guest, the 5 Dharma Types, Vedic Wisdom for Discovering Your Purpose and Destiny. Our guest is author Simon Chokoisky. His book, The 5 Dharma Types, Vedic Wisdom for Discovering Your Purpose and Destiny, a 2014 Destiny book release, and his website, www.spirittype.com. And to introduce, for those who are just joining us, this topic, that's a non sequitur. I think I should have said, to introduce this topic for those just joining us, I'd like to share something our guest wrote. Quote, "The ancient system of social structure and spiritual duty, known as Dharma, has modern applications for people seeking their life's purpose. The 5 Dharma archetypes, warrior, educator, merchant, laborer, and outsider, can function as an operating system for your identity, helping you map your life and play to your innate strengths. By accepting and understanding the nature of your type, you may begin to align with your true purpose and, regardless of fate and tendency, find joy and meaning in life." So for those that are continuing with us from last hour, it's a unique opportunity to learn more about the Veda traditions and the 5 Dharma types. We've touched a little bit, Simon, on the educator, the laborer, and the warrior. Can you go back through those a little bit and summarize for those who may just be joining us, and then we'll touch on the others we've not talked about at all?
Absolutely. And let me just say that if we ever come out with an audiobook, I want you to be the person who reads it.
I would love to. I'd love,
I love the way you read that.
Thank you. Nobody's ever asked me to do a book, and I would just love to do a book.
Well, it was very concise and well spoken. So thank you.
I've
for
had a little
sharing.
practice. I tried to add up one day how many hundreds of thousands of hours I seem to have been on the air in my lifetime. Anyway, it was many hours of talking.
So the warrior type their dharma is to be calm when everyone else is freaking out. Their dharma is to solve problems that no one else can solve, and ultimately to give their life for a just cause. Their problem is finding the just cause. And reading the chapter on the warrior type will hopefully give your listeners who are warrior types a way to do that. Then the laborer's dharma is to create community, to create. Theirs is the house where there's something always cooking and the door is always open and people can always come over and say, "Can I borrow this tool? Hey, can I borrow some sugar?" You're the rock, the foundation of society, and laborers give, and they serve because it comes naturally. Then the educator type dharma is to give, but not material things, but like the air element that protects the earth, our atmosphere, right? It's invisible, and yet it protects us from the higher calamities like electromagnetic radiation, asteroids hitting the earth, and so on. So wisdom, knowledge, protects society from those invisible dangers like anarchy and vicious ideas and ideals. So it's the educator's dharma to teach truth and to spread truth through society. So those are the 3 fundamental drives of those 3 types.
Mm-hmm. And then the merchant.
So the merchant is next. The merchant their dharma is to spread good cheer and joy and to create opportunities for others. I love the merchant's dharma. I think next lifetime I want to be born as a merchant.
It's so funny. I was past my husband in the hallway, and he and I are so similar. We're both outsiders, we're both educators, and we're both warriors. And he's got a bit of the merchant. And I said, I don't think I have any of the merchant. I run a healthcare center, and it's a service-oriented thing, but mine was the vision, not the merchant part.
Yeah, well, merchants are necessary because they are able to turn something, they create value, basically. basically. So if you're a merchant, you create value for the world. And, for example, you could be walking down the beach and you see a coconut, and 10 people will walk past that coconut, but the merchant will pick it up and go, that kind of looks like Elvis. They'll put it on eBay and make $150 on it because they saw value somewhere where no one else did.
Mm-hmm.
And merchants have that gift. Now, they have that gift also with people, so they can look at someone and say, you know what, Jane, you should meet Tony. You guys would hook up well together. They have an eye for matchmaking, for networking, and so merchants are the most sort of social type. Even if they don't consider themselves social, they have a way of attracting company and making people feel good. And that's their dharma, basically, is to create value for people.
And it's so interesting because when you think about the merchant as being the water element, it makes so much more sense about the feeling nature of the merchant, to be able to blend things and to see the value in different things that somebody else might not see how they interact or interrelate.
Well, and think about properties along the water. Your house on the beach costs more money than the house 3 streets back. Water has value. And because in older times, it was along the river that the goods were brought to shore. So water has inherent value in human psychology, and the merchant types are tapped into that water element better than anyone else. And water, like you said, is also our emotions, our hormones and brain chemistry that makes us feel up and makes us feel down. And so merchants are the most volatile type as well. That's one of their on their dark side, they can be, a little bit all over, very high, but also very low, and they can be mean-spirited when they're low.
Mm-hmm. And you also, it's interesting because when you've been talking about the intelligence in these different Dharma types, you said of the warrior, the intelligence is energetic, and of the educator, it's intellectual. The merchant, I love you. I just love the words that the traditions appoint. Is that the labor is emotional, but the merchant is aesthetic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a sense for what brings joy and pleasantness. So a laborer can build a house and make it secure and solid, but a merchant type has to come in and make it wow, right? To create that wow factor of putting the furniture in the right place and the right paint and so on.
An eye for beauty is part of it, which is really, in Kabbalah, beauty is the center of the tree of life. It's Tiferet, and it's where all things find their balance. We live in a culture that has really demonized, or at least diminished, the value of beauty in our lives, because to me, it's really what gives the soul such pleasure.
Well, we live in a culture that has created a value on beauty, and where you can create a value on it, it's great. So that's why we have plastic surgery, and we have, these facades that look really good. But
that's not really beauty. That's kind of, at least I don't look at that as beauty. To me, that's not beauty. That's affect. It's
right. Well, yeah. No, I agree with you, and I think in the United States is a merchant culture.
Yeah.
And when a merchant culture tends to devolve, sometimes it will assign beauty to things that are it'll assign a superficial beauty.
I see.
Right?
Yes.
And then put a value on that. But real beauty, you can't assign a value to, and that's why sometimes merchant cultures don't value it.
That's so interesting.
Can't make money on it.
That's so very interesting when you think about that. Now, the one we haven't touched on, and we'll come back through these, folks. If you're going, wait a second, come back. I think I'm a warrior. No, I think I'm an outsider. So people, if they've heard a little bit and they want to know more, I encourage you to get the copy of this book, The 5 Dharma Types by Simon Chokoisky. So the outsider, which I joked around and you said, oh, you must be, I definitively am an outsider who manifests some of these other qualities of a warrior and an educator and a laborer also. It's so interesting. Okay, so talk to us about the outsider.
So there's 5 ways to know if you're an outsider. The first is when you were young, ask yourself the question, did you move to a place that was different than you, where the kids and the environment was different from what you're used to? Either your skin color was different, or your speech was different, or you had chemical sensitivities that others didn't, or your sexual orientation. Whatever it is, you were different from your surroundings. That's one thing from a very early age. The second thing is that outsiders...
But before you pass that, Simon, could an outsider also be someone that others don't perceive to be an outsider, but in their own skin and in their own psyche, they don't feel understood. They don't feel that they belong, even if they're like a really popular person.
Correct. Yeah, that's possible, and that's an outsider. There are many outsiders who are very well insulated, who do very well in the world, but inside they feel very different. And yeah, so there are many actors are that way, where they play the very social, fun-loving kind of part, but inside they're actually outsiders. They want to reform things. They want to innovate, and above all, they want their freedom. So the second thing is if you are an outsider, you value freedom more than air and water.
Yep, there we are. That's me.
Right, and that usually
my theme song. You know my theme song since I was a child, which is "No one can tell me what to do." Don't you tell me what to do.
Yeah, and that's it, because you have to find your own road, and I can lock you up in an office and pay you a lot of money, and tell you don't do this, don't do that, and that would be a recipe for long-term disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Because short-term it could work, but long-term it would cause you dukkha, this word that we talked about in the beginning. It would make you suffer. And whereas another type, maybe a laborer type or even any of the other types, that scenario may work for them because it may be good with their dharma. But as an outsider, you need to have freedom above all else. Then the third thing is the ability to wear many hats, the ability to blend and play many roles. So outsiders go, well, yeah, I'm all of the types
mm-hmm.
very often, or I'm 3 or 4 of the types. And that's because you have the ability to blend. That's number 3. Number 4 is at a certain point in life, outsiders realize that in all of their freedom and roaming and, studying ancient wisdom from the East and ancient wisdom from the West and Sufi dance and Mongolian cooking and, shadow yoga and all these different things, at some point you go, all right, which of this is really me?
Right.
And you begin to consolidate and blend in a way that makes sense and really create your own system. So you create, from East and West cooking, you create fusion cuisine. You create your style. In the book I use a silly example, but I grew up in the 80s, so Taibo was the big thing back then, which was boxing and Thai kickboxing and the Christian kind of ideology that the guy Billy Blanks had. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
That's the outsider's thing, the ability to blend.
I was already older than you by then, but I do recall it.
It was for a long time, it was the highest selling infomercial product of all time.
Oh, interesting.
And so anyway, it was his blend of East and West and so on. So my point in bringing that example up is it doesn't have to be something huge. Like you don't have to reform the world. Jesus was an outsider. He said, this technology, this system, we can apply to the Gentile and the Jew. That was revolutionary at the time. And so that's the outsider's role, is to blend different traditions and cultures and create something new, what I call the unique expression. And so that's point number 4. And the final point, and I know there's a lot of points, but they're all summarized in the book, is that to really live your life, to really realize your dream, to minimize dukkha, suffering as an outsider, take responsibility for everything in your life. I know it's a cliche thing, and people go, well, take responsibility for yourself, young man or young lady.
Mm-hmm.
But for outsiders, it really works, because outsiders above everyone else have a reason why stuff isn't working. It's the government. It's, I was just born this way. I didn't get a chance, or, whatever. My parents didn't love me. And all of that can be true, and it probably is true. Nonetheless, if you believe in karma and sort of past lives, or even if you don't believe in that stuff, and you simply believe that you've inherited the genetic makeup of your ancestors, and that's fine, we have. Own it. Okay, this is the body I was given. This is the mind I was given, and this is the social situation I was born into. Now, how can I give the world my unique expression based on everything I've done? Taking responsibility and sharing your gift, that is the Dharma of the outsider type.
That's lovely. And you have a beautiful summary of attributes of each Dharma type. So everybody turn to page 138 in your book, right? And you'll see it. You've just done a beautiful job. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Our guest is Simon Chokoisky, Chokoisky. His book is a Destiny book release of 2014, and the title, The 5 Dharma Types, Vedic Wisdom for Discovering Your Purpose and Destiny. Go to www.spirittype.com.
Hello, I'm Catherine Ravenwood, author of How to Create Sacred Water, A Guide to Rituals and Practices, published by Inner Tradition, Bear and Company. You are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronimus. I hope you enjoy the show and all of her wonderful guests. Please read my book and send your prayers to the water. Thank you, water, for your gift of life. I see you clean and restored.
Simon Chokoisky is our guest. His book, The 5 Dharma Types, Vedic Wisdom for Discovering Your Purpose and Destiny. Thank you to Destiny Books. So I want to come back to these wonderful ways of looking at our lives, because as you pointed out in the beginning, if we live in accordance with our Dharma, we live in accordance with natural law. So you've described in a sort of general and specific way the laborer, the merchant, the warrior, the educator, and the outsider. How does this affect us as we grow? Because as you pointed out, sometimes we can be a combination of these qualities, but do we have a basic Dharma type and then the others are aspects of it?
Yeah, we do have a basic Dharma type. Like a song, your life is born in a certain key. It may be the key of C or the key of E, and for a few people, like in a few songs, they change the key mid-song or mid-chorus sometimes. But most of us are born a certain type, and what changes is that we go through different life cycles. So, for example, I'm an educator, but the first 30 years of my life were spent in outsider life cycles, which means that I was interested in truth and knowledge, but it was foreign knowledge. It was stuff that wasn't, basic math, basic science. It was the French language. It was, Vedic mathematics. It was astrology, stuff that was out of the box. And anyone in an outsider period is going to experience that. And how do you know what cycle you're in? That requires a look at your Vedic life map, your horoscope. And it's interesting that you brought up name because, here's something that may or may not blow your mind, but the sound of your name can actually vibrate at the level that is true for you, or it could vibrate at a level that creates dissonance for you. And sometimes what I do is I help people even find their sacred sound or the quote-unquote lucky sound, is that you can look at a person's chart, which is the technology of the Vedic tradition, is based on your date, time, and place of birth. You have a life map. We call it a horoscope in the West. And by looking at that chart, I can, if I'm alert and astute enough, find the sound appropriated for you, and as well as your Dharma type, as well as a number of other things. And so the sound of your name is actually a very important thing. And I hope you weren't asking people to remember my last name.
Well, we'll start with Simon. You
Okay,
know,
good.
Samek, Mem, Nun. We could do a whole Hebrew thing on that. Well, it's interesting because some of us, like myself, my birth name is Jill, but hardly anybody called me that. It was a very popular name when I was born in the mid-50s. And there were a lot of Jills in my class. Little kids couldn't say it, and that bothered me because I used to love working with little kids. But then I had all these nicknames. People had this penchant for giving me nicknames, and one of them stuck was Zooey, became Zoe, became Zohara, which is the Hebrew name that my Kabbalistic mime teacher from Morocco gave me when I was 21. And his name is Samuel Avital, and as soon as he said it, I went, somebody has finally said my name.
Beautiful. And you know what's interesting? In the Sanskrit alphabet, there is no Z sound. So J is Z. So Jill is Zil is Z. That's the same.
Oh, interesting.
A wavelength. It's a palatal sound. Z, J, Z. Comes from the very similar place in the mouth. So in essence, your parents did the best they could.
Yeah, well, my brother was called Joe, so I joke I was called Zoe. It's
He's
like
Zoe,
they
yeah.
thought I was going to be born then, but I mean he was, but I was anyway. But our names, I'm glad you brought that up because there are people in the listening audience who may have grandchildren about to be born, or somebody younger is about to have a child, that the name of the child is really important. As you point out, it's supposed to express the purpose of the incarnating being. In fact, I recently had an experience with someone I know who called me and said they didn't know what to name their child. And I said, well, I'll talk to her. I'm a telepath. And so I talked to the little baby in the womb, and she gave me 3 names she'd be happy to be called by. And I called the parents, and I said, these are the names. And they were like incredulous. They said, we don't believe it. Those are the 3 names on our list.
Wow. How incredible is that?
Yeah, it's so lovely. But I think it's so important what you said, that I also helped them pick their birth date because it was cesarean, and we could either pick a Scorpio moon or a Sagittarius moon. And I went, oh, by all means, take the Sagittarius moon.
Yeah.
So I know you'd
Right.
agree with that too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
by the way, I'm a Scorpio sun sign, so all you Scorpios, get your stingers down. I know whereof I speak, at least in the Western tradition. In Vedic astrology, it's something else. So.
in what way? How do they differ while we diverge for a moment?
Oh, well, Western is based on the tropical zodiac, which is based on the first day of spring. So every March 21st, we say the sun is in Aries. But the sun, if you look up at the sky, is actually not in Aries. On March 21st, it's at about 6 degrees Pisces. So Vedic astrology uses the sidereal zodiac, which is the actual signs in the sky. So in Vedic astrology, we say, oh, the sun is at 6 degrees Pisces. So
well,
often,
that's a big difference astrologically speaking in terms of degrees, so that in the Western astrology, somebody could be, let's say a Pisces, but in another, they could be a different sign in the Vedic astrology.
Right. So in Western astrology, I'm a Scorpio, and, I do have all of those Scorpionic qualities. But in Vedic astrology, my sun actually falls in Libra because that's where it was in the heavens when I was born. How
interesting. And why did Western astrology, I've never really asked an astrologer, so this is a new opportunity for me. I once talked to Jeffrey Armstrong. I'm sure you know Jeffrey, who's a Vedic astrologer as well. But why did the Western astrology work with this, I guess, almost a made-up beginning?
Well, because at one time they were the same. So about 323 AD or around there, no one really knows exactly, they were the same. But what happens is we have a thing called precession, which is the wobble of the Earth,
right,
which makes the March 21st, the first day of spring, slowly move. So 1 degree every 73 years. It recedes backward.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the course of hundreds and hundreds of years, it's receded back. And so now there's quite a bit of a difference. But the thing to remember is that these are 2 different systems. So, for example, Vedic astrology doesn't use your sun sign to describe who you are. So to say that I'm a Libra in, sun sign in Vedic doesn't mean the same thing. They use a totally different way of describing my personality, which is the moon star. And there are 27 moon stars. So
Huh.
it's just
Interesting.
apples and oranges.
Very different. I really know nothing about Vedic astrology. I think somebody once did my chart. But look, coming back to there, I mentioned a little earlier in the program, Simon, that you have pointed out that there are certain stresses that affect each of the types, and that might also be a way for people to appreciate who they are by looking at what stresses them the most and how it affects them the most.
Yeah, and we can break down stress in a couple of ways. One is long-term versus short-term. And so warriors and merchants tend to suffer more from short-term stress. And it kind of makes sense. Think about a warrior. Let's say it's a soldier. They put themselves in a stressful situation, intensely stressful, and then it's over.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one way or another, it's over. Merchants do the same thing. Merchants are often performers. Muhammad Ali was a merchant. He'd go and box. There would be tremendous stress. And then
you said one of the highlights of a merchant is they enjoy pleasing others and they enjoy the feedback from others.
Yes, and they bring value to whatever they do. So Muhammad Ali took this art of boxing, which used to make a few $1,000s for the fighters, and he turned it into $1 million business. Marilyn Monroe did the same thing with, or at least tried to do it. She did do it for women in cinema, and Elvis did it for music. They were all merchant types. So merchants bring value and money and awareness to what they do. But for them, the stress is short-term and intense. Whereas for educators and laborers, it's long-term chronic kind of stuff. So the coping strategies are different. For example, warriors and merchants who have short-term stress, they need to learn techniques like deep breathing, like doing that 20 times before you have to go on stage or go into battle or whatever it is, right, to get you in a calm state. Whereas for educators and laborers, they have to just develop a daily practice of stress release that, you know, maybe isn't as intense as the others, but that you just do every day to unwind.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be as simple as taking a nap, you know, in the afternoon if you need it, or, you know, in my other books, I talk about health coping strategies for each of the Dharma types. My second book is called Sex, Love, and Dharma, and it should have been called Health, Love, and Dharma, because there's more stuff like that. But the point is, if you're an educator or a laborer, long-term stress is your enemy. And as I mentioned earlier, for educators, it can turn into Alzheimer's, dementia, cognitive decline, Parkinsonism, and things that wear on your nervous system over time, right? It doesn't happen right away, and that's why it sneaks up on you. And for the laborer, it's wear on your joints, wear on your connective tissue, and blood pressure problems are a big deal but this happens over time. You don't suddenly have high blood pressure. And then warriors and merchants are more intense. So that's where we start with dealing with stress. And you know, everyone is individual, but knowing your Dharma type can help us understand how to approach your particular health issue.
It's very interesting, as well as how to manage your emotions and the use of your mind, you know, so that you're not trying to be a merchant when you're in a warrior challenge, and you're not trying to be a laborer when you need to be an educator. I mean,
that is a big deal.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but my thinking was that oftentimes we think we're only one thing, and oftentimes humans tend to name themselves by their occupation. Oh, I'm a bricklayer. Oh, I'm a surgeon. Oh, I'm, a chef. Versus, oh, I'm trying to change the world, and the way I'm doing it is by cooking. And it's interesting to me because when you look at the Dharma types, it gives you a different kind of depth, I think would be a fair word, as well as a much greater wisdom body associated with everybody you meet. So give us an exercise that we could do in the course of a day that might help us, identify some of these things. I have to say I love the way of associating them with seasons because it seems to, I don't know, it makes a little more sense to me. Maybe you could go through the types and the seasons and see if it helps anybody in our listening audience as well.
Yeah, so we can go through a number of exercises. The first way that I like to approach helping clients find their truth is to start with the physical body, because that's the easiest to manipulate and work with, because it's right there. And in the physical body, something I mentioned earlier is the microbiome. In my opinion, restoring your gut back to its balance with a specific regimen of pro and prebiotics, with eating certain food, first of all, will bring your body to a state of at least basic equilibrium. Because a lot of us try to sit and meditate, for example. But it's very hard to meditate if your gut is off, if you're, wanting to pass gas or your belly's full. You can't think, you can't empty your mind because, the ancient yogis used to say that the mind is the space between your neck and your pubic bone. It's actually your gut. And the definition of yoga in Sanskrit is yoga chitta vritti nirodha, which means yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind stuff. And what they mean by the mind stuff is, in large part, the stuff that's in your gut. So
the stomach brain.
The stomach brain. So here is one technique for finding your Dharma. And this is going to sound a little crazy, but here we go. Fast for 24 hours. Don't eat anything. Now, of course, if you're diabetic or if you have certain health issues, please consult with your physician beforehand. But fasting creates space in your gut. And when you create space, you allow spirit to speak to you. You allow yourself to speak to you. And
when you say fasting, do you mean drinking water and nothing else, or not even water?
No, it's up to you. Based on your constitution and what you feel you can do. Some people go even with no water. I don't necessarily recommend no water, but...
I don't either. That's why I asked. But
yeah, you should put as little solid food in your mouth as possible. If you need to eat a few grapes because you're absolutely starving, by all means, go for it. But for that 24-hour period, meaning from dinner tonight to dinner tomorrow night, that's it. Because you're including the 8 hours that you sleep. So basically you're just skipping breakfast and lunch. Fasting is not that hard. But what you'll find when you do it is your personality will change. You will go from being grumpy to being angry to being, and just watch those changes and go, that's not me. Okay. Just observe. And observe these as things coming out of you. And after a while, by the evening time, you should come to a place of kind of equanimity. And you will receive insights that come to you, because there's a saying in Vastu, which is the science of feng shui in India, that says, keep the center of your home open, because that is the place of spirit. And people who build their house according to that principle, they always keep the center open to invite prosperity and inspiration to come into their home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same applies to your body. If you open up, keep your center open, your belly button is there for a reason. That's the depression in your center.
That's where we put homeopathic remedies. We're going to take a little break. I actually knew a practitioner who used to do that. She goes, I know what the belly button's for. That's where we put liquid homeopathic remedies. We'll be right back. Our guest is Simon Chokoisky. Did I pronounce that right? Chokoisky, yes. The 5 Dharma Types, Vedic... It's nice to ask you at the end of the show, have I said your name right? The 5 Dharma Types, Vedic Wisdom for discovering your purpose and destiny.
Hello, this is Kane Carroll, author of The 4 Dignities. You can learn more about everyday meditation, self-healing, and embodied presence at www.kanecarroll.com. You're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronimus.
Absolutely wonderful book, The Four Dignities by Kane Carroll. Like I've explained to the audience, Simon, I've been really looking for tools that can be passed on to people at this point, not just information, but things that if we apply them in our life, even a partial application makes a difference. So to think about the four dignities of being meditations, either standing, lying down, walking, or sitting. And often people think there's only one way you can meditate, which is sitting cross-legged on the floor. And so I loved when Kane Carroll joined us and shared with people, no, there's all kinds of ways to meditate. So in your book that we've been discussing for 2 hours, and we've really just begun to touch on the topic, ladies and gentlemen, the 5 Dharma Types, Vedic Wisdom for Discovering Your Purpose and Destiny. We share a publisher, Inner Traditions, Destiny Book 2014 release. Go to www.spirittype.com. I'd like to not forget the part in your book called Secret Fear, because sometimes it's by identifying with the fears that we have that we can quickly discover what Dharma type we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you're a laborer type, you have a secret fear of feeling stupid, that other people will think you're stupid.
Like being ridiculed or something.
Being ridiculed, exactly. Oprah is a laborer type, and she shared, I think, on one of her shows that when she's around what she calls super smart people. Of course, she's a super smart woman, but, people like Dr. Phil and some of the other experts who are around her, that she begins to feel small.
Mm-hmm.
And here is, one of the world's richest and most successful women, and she feels small. And that's because all laborers have this deep inner anxiety about being or feeling stupid, even though it's not founded on anything necessarily. So that's the laborer's secret fear.
But then you said the antidote is love and devotion.
Love and devotion, because that's something that you are an expert at, that you are the world's, no PhD can match you in that area.
Isn't that beautiful?
So that's where laborers are smartest.
And so it interests me that sometimes people go, oh, I want to be on a love and devotion path, and yet they're a warrior. Or they say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right, and you can pull it off for a while, but after a while, it's not your path. And regardless of what tradition, whether it's Sufism or Jainism or Christianity, it doesn't matter. Your Dharma type will help you find the right spiritual path. And love and devotion and service is the path for the laborer.
Right. Although you can be a warrior with love and devotion to it. And so it's not to say you don't experience these other qualities of your nature and identity, but you experience them for a particular reason. So the laborer's secret fears of being ridiculed or perceived as not knowing enough. The merchant's secret fear, you said, is of being worthless or being ridiculed.
Well, not being ridiculed, but feeling, merchants feel empty inside.
That's it, yeah.
So even though they create value in the world, secretly, and this is deep down, in the middle of the night, if you ask them, they may share this with you, that they feel empty and worthless. And for them, creating that worth is tantamount to creating value for others rather than buying the latest stereo, smoking the latest whatever drug of fashion is there. Mm-hmm. That stuff fills you short term.
Filling it with things from the outside.
Right. The long term antidote is charity. Give.
That's
give.
beautiful. That's beautiful.
And so the spiritual path for the merchant is rituals, creating sacred get-togethers, and creating opportunities for others to come to your church or so on.
I love that. And then you said I'm sorry, were you still on the merchant?
No.
Okay, so the educator, I found this fascinating, being an outsider, educator, warrior, whatever, everything. You said the educator type secret fear is for survival. For a whole year during Y2K, I did programs every Friday about surviving, solar flares, coronal mass ejections, whatever.
Yeah, we educators, because we're in our brains so much, tend to pay less attention to our bodies and our physical needs for sustenance, including our safety and security. So educators secretly fear just being trampled under by the onslaught of society or nature.
I don't go to public events. I haven't since I was, years now, decades.
Interesting.
Well, I'm also tiny, but it's so interesting. I'm also sensitive, and I absorb everything, and an empath. And my audience knows this because I blah blah on and on about myself now and then. But it's so interesting to me because not knowing the Dharma types like you do, as I was reading this book, I was having a real appreciation for qualities about my life and my nature that are archetypal within this tradition. And so I thank you, really. I thank you for this just wonderful book. All right, so The Educator's Secret Fears for Survival. And you said Gandhi, and I love that. He was my hero as a child. He was my real personal hero. Is an example of an educator who, quote, harnessed the forces of surrender to achieve superhuman results.
Yeah, so your antidote is surrender. Surrender to the possibility that you may be trampled over and allow a higher force to take care of you and guide you. That's the educator's.
Amen. I've been working on that myself, having faith in it all, that everything you need will be given to you when you need it. And then the warrior, I thought this was just fascinating. The warrior secretly fears God. Warriors are masters of the material plane where they can control themselves and their environment. They fear that which they cannot control.
That's it. They fear that which they cannot control, and it freaks them out. And that's why they are attracted to educators, both in personal relationships and in general, because educators seem to have a handle on the issue of God. Is there a God? Isn't there? And what are they like? And what is pure consciousness like? And does spirit love us? Whereas warriors tend to be much more cynical. They are, they've lived in the world. They've seen the glass is half empty, and they're not sure about anything beyond death. And so, so their antidote is self-sacrifice, the sense that it doesn't matter what's beyond death. Doing your dharma is what matters, and launching yourself into that, even if it's saving people or saving a cause at the expense of your own life or well-being.
Well, and I love that you portrayed the Buddha, my other childhood hero, was a warrior who transcended death by his intense practices, many of which he learned from his educator comrades in the forest.
Yeah, nobody could do the stuff. The stuff the Buddha did is intense. There are statues of him in India that show his spine through the front. His stomach was so caved in that you could see his spine through it. I mean, that's intense practice. And, of course, later in China you have the Fat Buddha, but, that's way later on. So, as a warrior, he did everything. He sacrificed his body, mind, and emotions completely to achieve enlightenment.
And then finally, we have to touch on the outsider before the evening is over, because you say the outsider fears being caught and restrained, and the answer is to be plain and honest with people.
Yeah, the outsider fears being caged because they love freedom more than anything, and their fear is that if the townspeople with the pitchforks get a hold of them, because of their kooky ideas or because of their being different, that they'll lock them up and keep them down. And the essence is to step into that fear and say, I have a unique expression to share, and I'm going to share it because it's my truth. And even though it's innovative and maybe even revolutionary, it's meant to help society, not to break it down. And when you speak that truth to the world, people will put down their pitchforks and go, maybe I'll try it.
Now,
maybe there's something to this stuff.
You also do private consulting. If anybody in our audience wants to reach you, do they do it through the website spirittype.com?
Correct, spirittype.com. You can book an appointment and we can talk about anything from who's going to win tomorrow's baseball game.
Oh, yeah, wait. Let's finish on that. We didn't get to touch on how you use the baseball analogy. We have about 2 minutes.
Yes. Well, all of this stuff is theory, right? If you're listening to this and going, yeah, that sounds good, but how does it work in my life? So what I do is I put my money where my mouth is, and I've developed, I use Vedic astrology to predict the outcome of sporting events. And I actually wrote a book about that called Gambler's Dharma, Sports Betting with Vedic Astrology. And I showed in the black and white world of wins and losses that this stuff actually works, that you can apply this wisdom in something that's very mundane, like wins and losses, and see these techniques work. So if they work for, today's games that I got were that the underdog Atlanta Braves would beat the Oakland A's. They were huge underdogs. And that, there were two other teams. Baltimore would win today. I bet on them, bet like $500. Now, the reason I bet, and I'm sorry for those of you who are, just to clarify, who are not gamblers and not for this, is to show that the prediction was made beforehand. It's easy to say, oh, I knew Trump would win. Yeah, I knew that.
Right.
Right? It's another thing to go, yeah, and I actually wagered money to show that I made that prediction. So
interesting.
That's why I bet.
Well, you are a fascinating gentleman, Simon Chokoisky. I'm going to have trouble with this one no matter when. But I want to thank you once again, Simon, A, for joining us for the entire program and for writing yet another beautiful book, this one entitled The 5 Dharma Types, Vedic Wisdom for Discovering Your Purpose and Destiny. 21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronimus, and remember, we do need more love in the world.